Yeah, just wanted to give you a overview. I was asked to give an overview of neighborhood trends and dynamic demographics. We'll see if this matches what you want. We can sort of highlight, skip over as you need. I don't know if you want to have questions during it or at the end. It doesn't really matter to me, but we'll jump in. There's like 30 slides here, and I'm not sure. Well, we'll see. It'll all be available to you. So just a little bit about me. Lived 11 years in Warrendale, Como Park with my wife, son, and daughter. Enjoy biking, hiking, camping. Got community experience in district council, downtown district council. Shared that with Shevik, and then spent a couple years as staff director at Mac Groveland. Served with Dan and the St. Paul Planning Commission. And then right now I work as a research analyst for the City of St. Paul's Department of Planning and Economic Development. After the last 7 years, got background in planning development, GIS, data demographic analysis, IT background. We use a lot of first platform FileMaker increasingly actually in our work and our GIS as well. Here today as a volunteer and neighborhood resident rather than an official representative of the city, although I probably say exactly the same thing where I hear officials say. So I just wanted to really, you can take or leave this. This is just one way of thinking, but this is one way that I think about data and community decision making. If there's data, and that can be quantitative or qualitative. This is going to be very numerical, but there's other ways to think about data, and they're all valid. And I don't want to privilege one or the other. But this is sort of one aspect of what we're thinking. When you're thinking as a community member, there's policy guidance. You create I think this is partly in the context of updating the neighborhood plan, comprehensive plan, other plans, the city ordinances, state laws. And this is then decision-making toolkits, and from a community perspective, highlighting tools that lift up inclusive, positive sum, relational, restorative approaches to decision-making. And so for me, those all work together, and they're kind of three legs of a stool. When I'm confronted with difficult and challenging circumstances, I kind of fall back on those things. And again, I'm not distilled it perfectly as a philosophy, but I realize when I think about it, that's sort of how I interpolate. There's also this other thing that's an asset and can be a challenge, which is people are a huge asset, but they can also present challenges. There can be personalities and politics. And so there's this fourth leg of the stool that ideally you bring into that fold. You have a well-articulated sort of fold that you bring those all into sort of harmony together. And it's in that sense that I think about data, for whatever that's worth. Again, your mileage may vary. So here are the topics in general that we're going to cover, and I don't know if there's ones that you want more or less information on. My son and daughter make a couple of appearances through here, so sorry about that, or happy to share their images doing various things. So the quick general trends. Shevik approached me with the idea of showing general trends through the neighborhood, and the challenge with trends in Como, I can show you these as sort of top level trends, and these are decennial census to decennial census, so 2010 to 2020 over the last 10 years, and you'll see slight increases in population, slight increase in households, slight increase in housing units, a very slight increase in home ownership rate. You can also see a very slight decrease in vacant units. So all of that, good news, but it's very slight, and the reason that's important is when you dig slightly deeper than this, it's not the decennial census that surveys everybody. It's a survey, the American Community Survey, which is a census project as well. But then that has for something the size of Como, a fairly substantial margin of error. So I can't really show you change because the starting and end point would be perfectly well within the margin of error in a lot of cases. So instead, what I've decided might make sense is to sort of contextualize Como by comparing it to the city and the Twin Cities and sort of using that as a launching point for discussion, sort of understanding data. So this is a big, difficult chart to start out with. Sorry about this. I just thought I'd throw in things and you can look at these later. I can share this. But this is sort of the age distribution for Como Park 2010 and 2020. And what it really shows, the blue bars 2010, green bars 2020, is you just see sort of the baby boom generation aging sort of into the older cohorts. You see my generation, Generation X, and 49 sort of going. I'm at the very nadir of population. So I always have the short population trend, but you can just sort of see the aging of population. You can also see we have a sort of more than our typical share probably of the 20-year-old set in Como, which is indicative also of St. Paul generally. So just wanted to highlight that, and then you compare Como to St. Paul generally, and you can see, we are a little bit older than the city. The city overall is a little bit younger than Como, just in general form. So longer bars, orange bars for the city on top, longer blue bars for Como on the bottom. Just just as sort of a general way of understanding. This is something I'm going to do. I'm going to compare Como, St. Paul, and the metro a bunch of times with a chart like this. So just to look at this, households with one or more children under 18 years, Como Park, 27, St. Paul a little bit more, metro area a little bit more. We're the age types. We're right in the middle among the 17 planning districts in Como Park. So just a FYI there. So this is interesting. Just I thought I'd bring this up. Been in the news lately. A couple of years ago, we started noticing St. Paul's population dipping, Minneapolis is as well. And we started asking questions about why is this happening? Not a major dip, it dipped more in the early 2000s, but causes one to ask questions, right? Just post-pandemic. And so we dug in, and the one thing that was outside the margin where we kept coming back to was families with kids were moving, or there weren't as many of them in the city. I guess we don't know exactly whether they're moving in or out, or they're just not locating here. It's just there aren't as many. And thankfully, reinforcing this, there's been a lot of literature from the Star Tribune just last week, from the Atlantic, and from the Economic Innovation Group on the bottom, who've done a lot of research into this. And there's this coming, not huge, but substantive enough to sort of document moving out of the city of families with kids. So just a trend I thought I'd highlight, not excessively worrying, and it's happening nationwide. But it is something that we see in data in St. Paul as well, and I'm sure it shows up in Como as well if you had accurate enough data, or I'd expect it would. Race and ethnicity in Como Park, comparing 2010 to 2020. We are becoming, as is the city and the nation, more diverse. We're about 80%, just under 80% white, and we're now about a quarter, or a little bit more than a quarter, people of color in 2020. So you can just see the slices of people of color expanding as the white population also shrinks a little bit. I will say citywide, in general, the population growth, it's not been a contraction of the white population. It's actually been more just the growth that we've seen over the last 10 years, 2010 to 2020 especially, has been by adding people of color rather than reducing the white population. So just a little context there. And then if you compare us to St. Paul and the metro area, St. Paul's about 50% people of color, just been hovering there for the last several years. Metro area is about 2/3 people, 2/3 white, and 1/3 people of color. So you can see, just generally that relationship between sort of the different areas there. I'll share a map with a little hesitation because I'd like to do this map a little differently. It was done by someone who didn't quite follow my instructions the first time, but it's a fine map for what it shows. This is the dot map among the same racial and ethnic categories of who lives where in Como, and it's divided by block groups. You can do it so it's divided by block, which is what I wish they had done, of the different racial and ethnic groups. So I present this as draft because I do think there's a little bit more tweaking and review I'd like to do, but it looks and it feels right and true, and I just wish it were a little more granular. But you can see sort of different population dynamics. And basically what happens is in those block groups with the black outlines, we evenly spread the population in that area sort of across. It's not where actually people live, it's just sort of randomly split across those areas. So you can kind of get a general sense of the
again, and what the how what it's depicting is
there's one dot for every person who lives in Como there. And then within the black boxes, those are block groups. And so we took the demographics of that block group and we just randomly spread the representative dots by race and ethnicity across each of those black outline boxes. So again, would love to drill down to the block. And there are things that affect this, so I looked at the northwest corner, I thought, well, it's more diverse than maybe I was expecting, but then the Humphrey Job Corps Center, I think, has some on-site residents. And some dynamics like that. So there's sometimes a building will, change the sort of mass, I guess, or complexion of a particular area, which is just it's actually good.
I'm surprised that the area that side of the park and north, south of Lartner is that diverse.
North, sorry, which side of the park?
Upper left.
So I think that's the Humphrey Job Corps Center that may be driving that. I don't have another good.
It's probably all concentrated in one area along Snelling, but they dispersed it.
Yeah.
So that's not actual.
Okay, yeah. I'm still surprised by the
Job Corps has rooms for about 200 on site, but in 2020, depending on when the census survey was filled out, they had cleared out all of their residents.
Yeah, I don't know, it's a little bit. I'm not sure, I haven't tracked exactly how the Census Bureau has dealt with that, with the sort of like a college campus in that way, and there was a whole way of trying to make that work in the midst of the pandemic that was complicated and imperfect by any stretch, I'm sure, so. Yeah, and so this is draft, I would like to get down to the block and release it on our city website, eventually, but just thought I'd share that. So as we talk about race and ethnicity, I just wanted to introduce think trends we track as a city. Speaking as a city employee, I guess I'm sort of effectively, but I'm here as a resident, but we track 6 indicators of disparities along racial and ethnic lines that I think are just important to highlight as you think about what we do in community. These relate mainly to PEDs, planning and economic development activities, but unemployment, you can see the disparities. People of color have higher unemployment. That actually came down to being close to encouraging, or actually maybe it was below, but when the job market is really good, that one shrinks significantly. But when it's not doing so great, it's actually been pretty good in recent years. This data, I will point out as well, there's a lag in the data that we get. So this data is all from 2018 to 2022, which is the American Community Survey's 5-year survey data set. So you could think of this as 2020 data, although it's a weird year to think about, or you could just think about it bracketing in 2018 to 2022. So you see a disparity in unemployment and labor force participation, actually pretty close. Usually seen that be bigger. Per capita income doesn't change much, unfortunately. It's a 2-to-1 ratio, more than 2-to-1, which is obviously challenging and dispiriting and problematic. Home ownership, again, for some of those same reasons, people of color, white population is very high in comparison, almost double. Cost burden housing rate, similarly, people of color. Which we'll get into that more. I realized I introduced this term. That means if you pay more than 30% of your income for housing, your cost burden from the federal standard. And so people, you know, want to see how many people pay more than 30% of their income for housing, and people of color almost closing in on half of them do, and white population is a bit less. And then business ownership per 1,000 residents. Again, sort of that entrepreneurship and ability, and I think it partly ties back to if you don't have a lot of capital to begin with, it's very hard to start a business. Migration, how many people live in the same place as a year ago? Como Park is fairly high. It's the 4th highest among the St. Paul planning districts, in line with the metro roughly. Percentage of residents who are foreign born, 8.6% of Como residents are foreign born, the 4th lowest among the St. Paul planning districts. Speaks English less than very well. There's a very small percentage of people in Como, lower than the metro area, and lower than St. Paul by a long shot. It's the 4th lowest again among St. Paul planning districts. No, 12% of Como Park residents do speak a language other than English at home at least some of the time. So, but only 2.7% don't speak English very well by their own estimation. Income, percentages of household by income bracket in Como Park. You can kind of take a quick look here, and it's the same sort of what you'd expect. We roughly run in parity. The blue is us in Como, the pink is the metro area, and the yellow is St. Paul. So we kind of follow the metro area. St. Paul has more lower income. We have a somewhat higher income profile, more in line with the metro area. And so percentage of residents living below the poverty level, Como, 9.7%, 1,643 people. Not inconsequential, obviously, for them, but nearly half is less than St. Paul. The metro area is a little bit less than this. So in 2024, just for context, the federal poverty guideline for a family of 4 is an income of less than $31,200 a year. So it's very low income. You're thinking low wage retail job type earnings, really nothing much more. Percentage of youth ages 0 to 17 living below the poverty level, Como Park, 399 youth. 12.4% of youth in that age range. So again, this is, you know, a really key indicator for success in education and life. Are you being raised in a household that's stable and has enough money to get by? And so St. Paul, nearly a quarter of youth fall into that. We're about half of the way to St. Paul. The metro area is just a little bit below us, but obviously poverty is most concerning as we think about, it's concerning everywhere, but especially as you think about the next generation. In 2024, the poverty guideline, again, for the family of four, $31,200. All right, quick jump into the status of housing units in Como Park. We're jumping into housing now to sort of take a quick dive into sort of the stats there. These bars, each of them represent all housing units in each of those jurisdictions, Como Park, St. Paul, and the metro area. On the right, you can see there's a small slice that are vacant, smallest in Como Park, a couple percent. In the rest of Como Park, you'll see most 66.3% are owner occupied houses and 30.3% are renter occupied houses. And that's almost perfectly in line with what the metro area is showing. St. Paul, by contrast, is roughly half and half, a little bit off. But
Is the metro area suburbs too, or?
yeah, so metro area, good question. There's many different ways you can define metro area, but for the purposes of these slides, I queued off of what the Minnesota Compass Project, more about them use, which is the 7-county metro area or the Met Council's jurisdiction as well. So Hennepin, Ramsey, Anoka, Carver, Dakota.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Very
for the help.
good.
I always stumble on something that's not good. Oh, no, Como Park has the highest percentage of owner occupied housing units among St. Paul. And a big part of that is probably zoning, land form, built form. I mean, as I think about it, I think if I ran the numbers, probably every other planning district has more of apartment style building. There are some in Como, but there's only a couple neighborhoods that I would think would come close to that. Just walk in my lanes. So average household size, Como is markedly lower than St. Paul in the metro area. Can't totally explain this, but I think there's, age, older population is part of it. Wealthier population is part of it. Although Como Park's not wealthier than the metro area, so that doesn't know it completely.
So that's really interesting in the context that 2/3 of the are owner occupied
Right.
homeowners. So 2/3 are homeowners. And yet the average household size is less than 2. Yeah,
I need to double check this. I'm just sitting here thinking about
it
this.
was like one person owning a home, living, there's gotta be a lot of those, like, wow.
Right, so let me double check this before I end the presentation because I did double check most things, but this is one where I didn't sort of pause and say, wait a minute. Because that seems weirdly low.
On the street, all my neighbors are single and they're in their houses by
Okay.
themselves.
So maybe I'm not wrong.
Yeah. But that's just a little,
They
Yeah.
can move to yours. I'm the only-
it's,
It is strikingly low. It's a 3-way tie. It seems like I'm getting the right data if I did that. So, percentage of housing units by year built, again, profile housing sort of follows St. Paul. Surprisingly, I think of Como as being newer than St. Paul, but in fact, it kind of falls roughly in line with where the city's at generally.
Tracks with the age of my boiler.
Right, exactly. Median rent paid, Como is very similar to St. Paul. Oops, didn't mean to go by that.
oh, could you,
So we're right in the middle of the pack in the city. We're a little bit below the metro area.
Is that per bed or per, how's the?
per unit,
Per unit, per month. And it's, again, this is all, you ask the resident who's living there on a survey, so you'd probably get to a slightly different number if you somehow could go through landlords and know what that number was. I mean, there's a little methodological things, but this is what the Census Bureau data shows. And again, it's that 2018 to 2022 time period. Although those are 2022 data, dollars in that. Percent of housing cost burdened household. So again, this is this question, can you afford the house you're living in? And again, from the federal government's perspective, your cost burden, it's concerning if you pay more than 30% of your annual income in rent and utilities combined. In Como Park, we're roughly in line overall. That's the gray bar with the metro area.
Yeah, just so I'm seeing this right, that says about 50% of St. Paul's renters are cost burdened households.
That is correct. And that's data I'm all too familiar with.
Right,
so-
I bet. Yeah.
No, that's true,
Wow.
unfortunately. So there is and it's ebbed and flowed, and in the, Great Recession, it went a little higher, it dropped down a little bit in the middle of the teens, and then, since the pandemic, it's rising back up. I actually don't think the latest data we have isn't quite as high as the worst of the Great Recession, but it may be just we haven't gotten the next year of data yet. So that is something that's fairly persistent. It changes a little bit over time, 5-10%, but it's pretty consistent. Baked in. And you can also look at there's not data that's specific to Como that I could get easily, but severely cost burdened households, which is those who pay 50%, more than 50%, and there's a goodly number of St. Paul residents.
So cost burden is 30% of your annual income,
Right.
total.
Right.
Total annual income. Over. Or well, if you're paying more than 30% of your total annual income.
Towards housing.
Towards housing and utilities combined.
Right, okay. So at 1,200 per month for a renter, 1190 or whatever it was, that's 14,000. So over, okay, I'm trying to use some math in my head. I'll have to get, can we get these, maybe? These?
Yeah.
It's okay.
Absolutely.
Well, most of them are parting. Well, you said the average was like 40,000, and so 14 is like half of that.
50,000. Yeah, it means you probably need to make like 50,000.
To not be.
14,000.
Right,
Yes.
or to be.
At 1,200.
As a household.
Mhm.
Yeah.
1,200 over, or, yeah, that 14,000 over 0.3. Someone will have to check my math, but it's about thousand.
Yeah, about
And Como's the third lowest, the third least cost burden among the 17 planning districts, but as you know, this is just an ongoing challenge. Well, I mean, the Twin Cities are actually one of the more affordable, although there's some disparities that make that not as meaningful. But this is a metro-wide and even worse in some ways nationwide issue that we've been hearing about for good reason. Here's the estimated market value of single family homes. This is totally public data. Sometimes people have to have public, but yes, you can look up anyone's property if you're in the county. And it's an interesting map, and this will tie back to the cost burden. But this before we get there, there's one thing that I think is really interesting that I always enjoy with maps like this, and you can kind of see what people value. And it's very clear when you look at this map that the purple and the red properties, which are the most expensive, are congregated around the park. People value proximity, yeah. Exactly. So, and the lake in particular seems to drive that. And this is data that we had from a few years ago. It's intricate to update it, so I didn't have the time. But down the right-hand side, I put sort of what's called the AMI, and I just want to quickly walk into what AMI is for those who are unfamiliar. AMI is area median income. So in the whole Twin Cities region, there's a median income, something like $110,000 now, for the median household in the Twin Cities. At 30% of AMI, which means you earn 30% of that, whatever, $110,000. That is the house value that you could afford if you earn 30% of that. So I'm talking $35,000, something like that. You can afford a $109,000 house. I don't know that there are any on the map, and honestly, if there was, there's probably so many repairs that would come with a house at that cost level that it actually isn't that cheap. But 50% AMI, there may be a few that you see on the map. You're starting to see some at 60% AMI. And I will note that the average household in St. Paul is right at about 60% AMI level. So basically, the average household in St. Paul couldn't afford the yellow, the orange, the red, or the pink colored things. They could only afford the ones above, meaning without paying more than 30% of their income on utilities and housing costs on everyone.
This is also interesting when you go back to the other slide that talks about how there's not a lot of turnover in these homes either. So even those ones that are at that 50 or 60 AMI, they don't have to come on the market to move into.
Right, yeah. And this is slightly old data, and I apologize. It's just, like I said, there's a lot of moving parts and take too much time to update it, but this is from the Met Council analysis. Interest rates affect this, the housing market has changed. So this actually probably would look worse now if you have the numbers. But yeah, that's part of the challenge there, just to sort of think through that aspect of the issue. Employment, educational attainment, you can see here just quickly, so the different comparative demographics. Following Como Park down, you can see at the highest levels of education, we are also have the highest percentage of people. The most bachelor's and advanced degrees, and actually we are the highest in that among the 17 planning districts, most educated. State planning districts.
Same.
I was saying,
Yeah, even,
too.
yeah.
That's all in fact.
I don't remember what those are. You sometimes forget St. Anthony also includes South St. Anthony.
Yeah,
Park,
that's
which
true.
There's a lot of their rentals and younger.
That's true. Good point.
So I think that disrupts maybe your preconceptions of St. Anthony Park. a little.
Mhm.
You know, no doubt.
Probably not Grove too, because there's a lot of college kids there too.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Unemployment rate, jumping into employment here, we're getting near the end. Como Park has a very low unemployment rate, the lowest among the St. Paul planning, 17 planning district, probably related to the education and some of the other things I've shown you already. St. Paul, more than double that, metro area significantly higher than we are as well. And just quickly to show where Como residents work, so this is where people who live in Como go to work. Here's the cities breakdown. St. Paul, Minneapolis capture about a quarter each, and then big cities and proximate cities, so Roseville, Bloomington. That's the only surprise I had was there's a number of people in St. Louis Park, which was not there, or Edina, which aren't very, or I mean, it's not very easy to get to, but there's, I think, a lot of businesses in those places, so that probably helps. That's the list of the top ones. Here's a quick map of where businesses employ people in Como Park. There is one big footnote here. This is Census Bureau data again, but they do it by, I believe, where paychecks are issued, and there's a few wrinkles to that you won't see as many city and school district employees as actually, like Como Park should have a bigger dot, I'm sure, on it as the Como High. Sorry, go ahead.
No,
But you'll see Energy Park, not surprisingly, that's where there's a lot of employment activity. And then there's scattered, small businesses that are on the student neighborhood. These aren't the exact locations, those have to be kept secret, but they're in rough proximity, I think, often on the block and which the employment's occurring. And this you can peruse if you want. It's hard to read. But I just thought I'd include it because it's interesting to some people, like what industries are people employed in. Como really excels most in education services, the giant green bar, and then healthcare and social assistance are the two biggest employers in Como Park. So you can kind of see compared to the so the green bars are the employers in Como Park. You can see where the residents of Como Park, what industries they work in. You can see the gray bar, which is St. Paul, where people are employed who work in St. Paul, and then where people are employed that work in the 7 county metro area. No, sorry, I should say that differently. Maybe I should label this better because in the moment I'm not saying that right. Como Park residents, St. Paul residents, and 7 county metro residents. So it should say residents, and then the green one is the employers for Como Park. So that's the only one that looks at it from the where is the employer located rather than where is the residence home located. My apologies.
I was
So
told
is
Como had more public sector employees than the rest of the city, just a ton of teachers, city employees. Is that, I suppose that's a little bit reflected in. Where do government employees fit in? Yeah, I suppose they're kind of.
Government, our public administration, which is 6 up from the bottom.
Would that include teachers?
No.
But it would not.
Teachers, I think, would go under educational.
Oh, okay.
And we are the highest.
Yeah.
So does this tell us that, well, who live in the neighborhood, work in the neighborhood?
That doesn't, I have no
It has
data on
Yeah, I have to stress
that.
that, separate data.
There's.
I could probably get something approximating that if I include the data the right way, but
Yeah.
I did not actually query that particular data.
But if you look at the map or whatever the one that shows employment by, like, there's just not many employment. If you don't work in Energy Park, you don't work in Como, unless you're working at one of the schools. Very little commercial. Yeah, that's where we're at.
this is also self-identified data too, right? So if you work in IT services, you might, you work for the city of St. Paul, you might say you work in information technology, and it might not show up as public administration.
That is correct. Yeah, and I don't know exactly how the question is phrased, so that probably depends on that, but yeah, I think that is, if you do IT for the city, you might showing their
Information.
information technology, yeah.
It's like our agricultural and hunting numbers are wanting.
Gotta work on that.
Look on that
The egg
hunting.
school fall out of our district.
Open up Como Park.
Yeah, so that's really the end of the presentation. I'll give you links. This is the product that we have online from that I probably actually more now work on. Community Development Insights. I'm putting this chart, because this is, I've seen this in news articles. Everyone wants this chart, and I've spent a lot of time scrutinizing it. Housing production in light of rent stabilization. So you can interact with that data to your content, and a lot of other things as well on the site. And then there's a bunch of links, which I can share with you in the chat as this is done. As well as maybe just, I think the presentation along. So Minnesota Compass from the Wilder Foundation, I use for a bunch of the data, because they have it nicely queried by Como Park. I also use the Census Bureau's website itself. It's not as user friendly, but Compass is. And then the Community Development Insights that I just referenced, and then those 3 articles I showed, families leaving cities, young families leaving cities that have them there if you're interested. But that's my presentation.
And we can get this in some way?
You can, absolutely. I mean,
There'll be a link to it in the newsletter. If Bob sends it to me before.
Great.
great, Bob.
Yeah, great.
We love demographics.
Oh, yes.
Well, happy to answer questions now or later if they come to you. I can do my best to answer them. I'm sure there's questions that occur to you that I didn't actually do the data.
So what will the Como neighborhood look like in 10 years, Bob?
I mean, they'll probably get a little bit bigger, more diverse. I don't know, that's a general guess I can make.
Not that different than it was right now.
Right, you just follow that trend line up, I think, and, I mean, it's almost a remarkably stable neighborhood because there isn't a lot of undeveloped land or giant projects happening, and so, you know, just following that trend line, I think is a pretty good bet.
I can't believe how quickly you shared that much data. Thank you so much. And we'll all be processing it for a while.
Yeah,
I made this plea to you once already via email, but those community development insights are so cool. And if there's any way that that PD could separate them by neighborhood, I think it would be helpful for the district councils to analyze themselves in that way, as well as take a hard look at funding formula equity and things like that. It would give us a lot more options of data to look at, because right now Minnesota Compass is the only thing that's divided already by district council, so it's the only data we have to go on to compare district demographics. So
the challenge is you have to do it by a special extract of data from the Census Bureau to do what Compass does. And so I was able to do Como neighborhood using census data because Como happens to follow census tracks almost perfectly. And then for some.
whatever you gotta do, just.
Yeah. We both take it. I think it's good advice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent. That was really great.